Welcome to the All About Us podcast, the show where we explore the stories, ideas, and creative forces that shape who we are. I'm your host, Carl Allen, and today we're diving into the powerful connection between art and identity, how art defines a people. Our guest is James F. Mueller, an accomplished author and fine artist whose work bridges literature, visual art, and human experience. He's best known for his book, Confessions of St. Augustine, published by Iconoclast Publishing, a work often compared to Catcher in the Rye. His art has been exhibited around the world in Paris, New York, Washington, D.C., and Miami. James holds an honorary Doctor of Arts degree and has spent over 2 decades supporting individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Based in Arizona, he also deeply connected with the Apache community, where he has served as a youth director and baseball coach. Jim, welcome to the All About Us podcast show. How are you doing today?
Great, Carl. Good to see you.
Okay, thank you for coming here today. Let's start with your beginning. When did art either enter your life, and what drew you towards expressing yourself through both painting and writing?
From as far back as I can remember, Carl, I was an artist. I would draw, make up stories, fantasies, adventures. So it wasn't like it came sometime down the road. From far back as I can recall, it was a part of me. It's like this burning fire inside. It was just the opposite. How do I contain it? How do I pay attention in school as opposed to my fantasies and my desire to create through all those years? It's a miracle I made it through, let's say, first grade, let alone grade school, let alone college eventually, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just a part of me. Fortunately, I lived in an art colony called New Hope, Pennsylvania, which is still like a Greenwich Village out in the rural part of Pennsylvania along the Delaware River, a lot of background history. So it was a natural in terms of my upbringing. I had all these opportunities to write and to paint. It almost seemed like no matter what I tried to do, to the contrary, I was forced back into art for a number of reasons, but mainly because I had that inner burning desire. So I could go off and write a book about it, which I did. So you just sort of stop me and tell me which direction you want to go.
Well, that's fine. That's fine. What area of Pennsylvania is that? What major city is that near?
It's above Philly, about an hour's drive. You go up the Delaware River, Washington's Crossing, right above there. Actually, it's quite famous in terms of art colonies. But we moved there right after the war, World War II, and you had a lot of refugees from the prison camps. You had the Japanese internment, a lot of famous names like George Nakashima. We had a lot of artists, actors that would commute to New York. Most of your actors who wanted someplace away from the city would live either in Woodstock or New Hope, preferably New Hope because you had a greater mix of artists, actors, writers, and so forth. So it was a natural, it encouraged. I never had to fight that. It was just a part of my upbringing. It was the culture I lived in. So that's a big part of it.
Okay. You've exhibited across major cities and communities that differ greatly in culture. How has those experiences shaped your sense of what art means in different societies?
Well, to me, art is a part of all of us, no matter what you may choose to realize in yourself. Each person expresses himself in some way artistically. The difference, we fine artists are more developed. And I think the study of different artists throughout the ages and different cultures help you as an artist to learn more. You can create in a vacuum and think you're great until you see somebody else who's doing the same thing but a far better job. So this way it gives you a chance to be exposed to the best in the world over the centuries. Like, for example, when I went to the Louvre, you could literally spend months in the Louvre, just in one section alone. So that's vital to me for a serious artist who wants to be a mover and a shaker, to study them all. And I won't limit it to the visual. To me, even more so, see, you can look at a painting and it's just a matter of seconds. But how long does it take to read War and Peace or one of these classics that are bigger than a New York Fun book? So one of my goals was to reach and write, well, let's get back to reading, to read the greatest works ever produced. I mean, it was a study to get the list of the best top 100, read them all thoroughly, like a chemist knows his chemical I would learn the books, which is all a part of my DNA now. So all this put together, the books, plays, poetry, paintings, it's all part of my vision. And therefore, when I create, that's all part of what's going on in my mind.
So see, when I thought I was talking to you as an artist, I'm thinking you just encapsulated maybe painting and artworks. You also do writing also.
writing's even more important. The painting was secondary. Matter of fact, the painting came later on to make a living, which I could make a very good living at doing that. In fact, if I just did that, I want to get into that. But no, writing was the main thing. Okay, I would draw throughout, all through school. But I found my real love was doing comedy routines. I used to write skits, plays for the college. In the Army, that was my assignment. Write funny stuff, Mueller, write monologues for community, yada, yada, yada. My main inspirations were like Catch in the Rye, Portnoy's Complaint, Ulysses by James Joyce, and all the greats. That was the first thing. The artwork came secondary in terms of working with it, more like background. So when you read my books, the background is like wallpaper or music in the background when you go to a movie. So no, the writing comes first, period. If you gave me a choice, I'd be a writer, hands down, period. That's the most important thing, but I can do them both.
Okay. I've always imagined that people in your field, either writers, actors, people who wrote novels, they have an ability to read material much faster than the average person does. How do you develop that skill?
Well, I guess it's just a part of doing it so often, it becomes a part of you. And after a while, you sort of sense where it's going. You have a grasp. Like in college, for example, I was this ne'er-do-well dilettante who would never attend class. Sometimes I could brag, I'd go to 2 classes, at the first class and the final, and still ace the course because I had this kind of memory or I remember stuff. Like, for example, I took a course. My first major was Bible Greek. I wanted to be a missionary to the Indians. That's changed since then, obviously. And I had to take Old Testament. So I skipped class, didn't go to most of the classes. The last day before the final, okay, how am I going to pass this course? Well, I ace all the kings because they had division in the kingdom, they had civil war and so forth. I can pretty much nail it. So the night before, I memorized all the kings, whether good and bad, how long it served, yada, yada, yada. When I aced the course, got a 96, the highest mark in the class. Even the class brain got a 64, I think. So they couldn't scale the test. I had a kind of memory where I could pick stuff up just like that. So when it becomes a part of you, you read fast, you sort of know where it's going, and you know how to pace yourself. Sometimes stuff took more time to read, others did not. It just becomes a part. Like person plays basketball. Why did it become so good? They just do it over and over again. You're never thinking about it. It becomes a part of you.
Okay. Today's theme, how art defines people, feels especially meaningful in a time when identity and culture are constantly being discussed. From your perspective, how does art reveal who we are as people?
If it's from the soul, from the gut, then it's honest and then it reveals your slice in life. Because who's to say which one is better? To me, the main thing is to find your voice and your vision. Write the book you always wanted to read, paint the pictures you all wanted to see. And that's what I did. I didn't try to be like anybody else. Granted, I'd learned from other people. I admired them and they were a part of my thinking, but I didn't try to be them. It's like comedy. To me, the best comedy is the unexpected, the original. I cannot stand canned laughter with a canned laughter in the background where it's predictable. All your great comedians were basically set the tone. To me, it's like which affects which. As culture and art change to people or vice versa? It's a little both. But to me, the best artists, they're the leaders. They change people's mind. And that's why I think the arts are far more effective than any other means because of the fact they reach the heart, not just the brain. Sometimes the brain just is a way of legitimizing the emotions. For example, Schindler's List, black and white, right? The only use of color was this one little girl in a red jacket. Why did he do that? Well, because you identify with a one little girl instead of a statistic of 6 million Jews wiped out by the Holocaust. All of a sudden, you see this one little girl you identify with, you sympathize with her, and all of a sudden it hits the heart. That's what changes the people's mind. Not Napoleon, who ruled more landmass than anybody else in the world? Genghis Khan or anybody else. However, did he change minds? No. He changed the culture perhaps by domination, but who changed the minds? the artist, whether it's visual, whether it's poetry, songs, drama, please, you name it. That's the one medium that to me will change the culture, change people. They're to me the true movers and shakers. Make sense? In other words, you got to be a fanatic. You got to be willing to give it all up, which they did. I would rather write the perfect novel and never be read as opposed to almost the best and read by everybody. Well, it's not practical. What's the sense of even doing that? But my mindset is such, it's got to be so perfect that I myself am satisfied, regardless of whether anybody else likes it, period, or whether I even make a cent of it. Fortunately, the art was so popular that, it almost dominated my life because of the demands. I had art shows here and there all over the country, over in Europe, Paris, etc. They've been shown all over the world. I can crank out a painting that sells for tens of thousands of dollars. Could have made a fortune, but that would have distracted from what I really wanted to write, not just the great American novel, but the great novel. For example, Time magazine in the year 2000 had the greatest this and that. What was the greatest song? Okay, Strange Fruit, Billie Holiday. What was the greatest novel of the 20th century? Ulysses by James Joyce. 20th century. I have such hubris that, hey, why can't I write the best novel of the 21st century? That's where I'm coming from, okay? And just to throw it out, how unique they were in their approach, they answered, what was the best TV show of the 20th century? Granted, TV didn't start until halfway through the 20th century. So, All in the Family, Mary Tyler Moore, blah, blah, blah. It was the one thing we didn't expect, The Simpsons. No, I'm not saying I agree, but the fact is, it was so original. It came out of nowhere. Well, wow, where'd these guys come from? So to me, it's a combination of originality and guts to stick with it. So that's where I'm coming from.
That's good. That's good. As I was coming up, I was raised in Reading, Pennsylvania. And as a child, I was kind of in this, the Black African American community. And then I went into the military and I got exposed to all of these different cultures. And I really started diving into indigenous populations. What sparked your interest in indigenous populations?
Oh, it's easy to say. I wanted to be an Indian ever since I can recall. It all started with the radio before they had TV. There was a program called Straight Arrow. And when you listened to the radio, it was advertised by Kellogg's shredded wheat. Now, the gimmick was you bite a shredded wheat between the biscuits. They had what they call ingenuity cards, how to make this Indian stuff, okay? So I would faithfully listen to Straight Arrow. I'd buy the comic books. I'd make the Indian stuff, which wasn't authentic, by the way. But I got so into it, well, I wanted to be an Indian. Literally, I wanted to be an Indian. My fancy life was Indians. My artwork was Indians. And eventually, led into living with the Indians, wanting to be a missionary with the Indians, yada, yada, yada. That's what all started. And the artwork was just a natural. That's where it started. But because of the fact I was the only person, except my best friend who I sort of convinced with a twisted arm to become part of, I was the only one. Everyone else rooted for the Cowboys. I rooted for the Indians. All my life, I identify with people that weren't white. Now, fortunately, my father, because of the fact we didn't know who he was dark. In fact, he looked sort of like you, the eyes and so forth, but he had more of an afro. We always wondered what he was. So I had that kind of background. Fortunately, and I don't go out in the sun anymore, by the way, but I used to be really black. So when you go out to the Jersey Shore, people would ask my mother, who's the little Puerto Rican kid live with you? Who's the little Hawaiian kid live with you? So I was any culture, but the one I was supposed to be, Mueller's obviously German. So not only was I for them, but I looked like them. Everywhere I went, I thought I was one of them. With the Jews, I thought I was a Jew. Greeks thought I was a Greek. Italians thought I was Italian, which I am, by the way. I'm all of those. Plus, but I didn't know it. Matter of fact, in high school, there was this kid who was still my friend. And later on, when he got to know me really well and realized I wasn't Jewish, he said, Mueller, I always thought you were Jewish. Oops, he was my best friend after that. And Jewish holidays, we had so many Jewish kids in the school, they let the whole school out. So I remember walking around in WASP neighborhoods, being called kike, sheeny, and so forth. I wondered, the little kid, I knew what that stuff meant. And so I realized, I can pass any culture, which is cool for me, because I identify with a lot of those cultures. And particularly the Black, because of the soul and the feeling. One of my favorite movies, by the way, Shaka Zulu. Do you remember him? Okay. Played by Henry Selick, who was not an actor. He was a soccer player. But what a fantastic actor. So fantastic that I used to watch the movie again and again and again. In fact, it inspired me to paint not his picture, but that type for my novel. Matter of fact, it's throughout my novel. In fact, this is the picture. I don't know if you can see her now. One of the characters in the book. The book, by the way, is not easy to define. There's a lot of different stories within stories. So I won't even get into that unless you persist.
Well, we have all the links and all of that will be in the show notes and all the promos. They'll be able to access everything about you. You spent many years working with the Apache community. What have you learned about the cultural expression through their art, and how has that influenced your own creative philosophy?
Well, I wouldn't just stop with them. I go way back to the beginning because way at the beginning, I was so into it. I knew all the famous Indians like kids knew their baseball cards. And I mean, literally. In fact, I know where most of them today. So, for example, I wanted to be a Sioux Indian, first of all. If I couldn't be a Sioux Indian, I wanted to be Apache Indian. If I couldn't be Apache, I wanted to be Navajo. So that was not just the Apache, but I love their music. I love the drum beat. I love the culture. I love the way they express it. I love the way they looked. It was like poetry in motion. I admired their strength. To me, a combination of beauty and strength, and just the way they expressed themselves. I mean, I made a teepee. I lived in my last semester of college. I lived in a teepee up in northern part of Massachusetts in the wintertime. So I couldn't afford to live otherwise. Yeah, to me, it's beautiful. You just have to, well, let me get back to art. I mean, I painted hundreds of portraits, and I personally believe, with the exception of, let's say, some kind of accident in birth or whatever, because we live in a fallen state, everyone is beautiful. Question is, you got to see the design in the person. So if you can see the design, you can see the beauty. So me, I could recognize something in all these cultures that was sort of given short shrift and see the beauty, not just inwardly, but outwardly. So I would paint all the different cultures and ethnic groups. Yet, to me, perspective, been so inundated with Western culture and their standard of beauty. Like, for example, what's our image of Jesus? Some white Anglo-Saxon guy looks like he's washed his hands with a dove all day, as opposed to a dark Jew with, you know what I'm talking about. So that to me is the big difference. We're narrow in our scope, whereas we think we're broad-minded, we're just the opposite. That's why I like to learn from different cultures, is I identify with them, I sympathize with them. I'm all for them. In fact, I am so militant. If I lived in a different environment, I could see myself. I won't even get into that because they'll probably arrest me.
Yeah.
But I can get through my artwork.
This is a dangerous time to talk about being a militant.
Definitely.
Yes.
Matter of fact, growing up, I loved fighting. That was martial arts were my thing. That being the fastest kid in the school. In fact, I was the one kid that took on the school bully and whipped him, made him say uncle, whatever. I attacked him. I didn't wait for him to come after me. So I realized, but that's not going to win the world. What's going to win the world is words, the well-spoken word, and through fiction, furthermore, just say preaching of politics, military. That's the one thing you can get through and change my. For example, you said you're a Marine back in Vietnam here.
Correct.
What changed their mind? I mean, folk songs for one thing, they were very impactful. Dylan, Baez, and so forth. I mean, movies. Johnny Got His Gun, for example, the book, the movie, stuff like that, or Paths of Glory. To me, the arts are the one thing that can change society. That's why.
That's true. You work closely with individuals who have intellectual disabilities and developmental also. How has that experience deepened your understanding of creativity and the human spirit?
Well, a great thing about them is there's no veneer. They're all of us, on a different level, but they're on an honest level. And you can have great fun. I worked there for 22 years. My whole attitude is, hey, this is summer camp, baby. I loved it. It was fun. It was tough at first. Like the first half year, I'm going nuts. How do people live with this? Well, I went there initially because of the fact I could spend the rest of the week when I wasn't working with them. I lived with them, but I could write the great American novel. But after a while, I was, hey, I'm living with a story right here. So it ended up, that became half of the whole novel. Actually, my book is a trilogy. There's 3 of them. So the last half of the book, called The Missionary, it's based on that experience. But because of the fact that it was so comical, I had to tone it down sometimes because no one would believe me. So aside from the fact it was great material, it was just fun. There's a certain honesty. And believe it or not, there's some people that are so incredibly intelligent in certain areas, which is totally American. Let me give you an example, for example. A lot of times when I speak, I'll talk about the butterfly effect. You know what that is, right? Butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil, caused a hurricane in Texas. Okay, what was the butterfly of the 20th century? All right, what's the 20th century? What characterized it? Okay, you had World War I, which caused the Russian Revolution, which caused the Treaty of Versailles, which caused Hitler, which caused the Holocaust, which caused World War II, which caused the Chinese Revolution, which caused the Cold War. Now, what was the butterfly that caused it all? Okay, the assassination of the Archduke of Austria. However, the one question no one knows, 1 out of a million might know it. Who was the butterfly? Now, I asked that question, and the only person that got it was one of the, quote, mentally handicapped. Avrilo Princeps. Now, that's a name that reeks of insignificance, unlike Harvey Oswald or, John Wilkes Booth. We all remember their names, but here's a guy that changed the whole century by the one little act, which almost didn't happen, by the way. First time around, he chickened out, and he went ahead and there's assassins playing all over the city. And finally, don't go in there thinking you're going to change them. You're not. You change yourself, but you won't change them. That's where they're there. Fantastic.
I know you believe that art is something universal, but do you believe that every human being, regardless of ability or background, has a natural language of expression?
Agree, but not like a fine artist. No, they were all given different talents. To me, it was just natural. I used to teach art, for example, and they just didn't have it. Why waste your time? I mean, I try to be more tactful when people show me something that they're putting their hopes on. But no, I do think there are certain talent God gives all different talents. But I do think we're all artistic in a sense. Everything we say and do, it's part of our expression, the way you dress, the way you talk. Even if you're copying somebody else, why are you doing it? Well, because maybe you're not great enough in your own mind, you don't have enough confidence to trust your own ability, therefore you mimic other people. But it's still an artistic form. Language, for example. That's where I like I love, for example, your early jazz. I mean, to me, I know I sound prejudiced, but to me, a white guy cannot play boogie woogie like a black, and I can tell this by listening. I won't even bother. They have great virtuosity, but man, they lack soul. I can be turned on. Well, like Billie Holiday, for example. The song was written by a Jew, believe it or not, but she sang it in a way nobody else could have. I think we're all given certain talent, but we're all artistic in a sense. But we won't necessarily be great artists or fine artists.
Your book, Confessions of St. Augustine, has been described as raw and deeply personal. What inspired you to write it, and how does it connect with your work as a visual artist?
Well, St. Augustine in particular, there's a theme that runs throughout the book, and the reason why I used that, my main characters, which are intellectually hip bad boy, for whom nothing is sacred, which is the same with St. Augustine until he was converted. But prior to that, man, he was a bad dude. So in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, what character best represents this? No, me alone, because I live the life too. It's someone like a Robin Williams with a delivery, or a Jack Nicholson, or Samuel L. Jackson. Put the three together, man, and you got something else. So between that and my personality, I developed this character, but I had to have him go somewhere, not just end up there. So it starts out that way, like St. Augustine in his Confessions, and it ends up in a similar way, but an updated version in different forms. My guy is an artist, and he sort of suppresses it, and it develops, which is why I use the art throughout the book. It becomes more and more prominent. So towards the end, he questions whether it really serves any good. Finally, he decides it does, but he goes through the whole last part questioning it. He makes fun of his art. He never takes it seriously, for example. It's not a platform like my art show and tell, well, look at this thing. He makes fun of it throughout, more like background music, like counterpoint. Matter of fact, it's hard to take him seriously sometimes when he's going across the country hitchhiking. Here's this beautiful country, he's not even paying attention to it in a sense you would think. So the art in the background shows you, whoa, here's this great, America's beautiful, this land is your land kind of thing. And his whole cynicism makes him blind to that. So the contrast is there right from the beginning. And it melts together in the middle where now he becomes a successful artist. And that becomes a major part of the story for a while. A lot of the stories are stories within the stories. He's telling his daughter's stories. He's making them up with the pictures in the background. Or in the latter part of the book, he's using for story. Like the one story he's making up, they're making up these stories to entertain themselves. And one of the stories that he makes up is, you've seen the movie My Cousin Vinny, right?
Parts of it.
Okay. Imagine if Vinny were living out here in a place with mainly handicap on the lam, and he's emailing his buddy back in New York, explaining what it's like. So he's trying to describe his madhouse through his perspective. And that's one of the stories I get into. But it's so wild, I had to actually tone it down because no one's going to believe this. I tried to tone it down to the point where the average person can understand it. So, like I said, the stories within the stories, but it all leads to one big overall story. The whole story to me is like one long poem from beginning where every word is a place with the pictures. It hangs together, but it's not something you can easily explain. That's why I'm sort of avoiding basic question. What's the book all about?
Yeah, but many people describe your work as a mirror of inner struggle and redemption.
Oh yeah, definitely that. No, yeah, ultimately,
You
there's something
say
in the book.
that your art is both confession and conversation?
You said my art?
Yeah.
Well, art in the general sense, yes, is the written, definitely. But the visual, it's more limiting. It's more positive. It's not Roman Rockwell. It's not that, nice warm fuzzies all the time. It's more sort of Wyeth, maybe Hopper. And he struggled with that. He struggled with the fact he's so popular as an artist. Is it really of worth when everyone likes it? Because everyone likes you, begin to wonder if anything to say is worth it. You think at least you'd have controversy, which I don't have a whole lot of other than the fact you get literary snobs who, because of the fact I can recognize what I'm looking at, couldn't be good. It's like, if I can understand, it must not be found. If I can't understand it, like Jackson Pollock, or what these used to call Jack the Dripper, the guy with all the spots, all the cameras, that's abstract Impressionism, which is brilliant. Now, one or two dabs of paint, he's going to make a few $1,000,000 on it. So that was sort of out when I first was into the arts. Later on, representational art, photorealism, which is more what I do, was not in back then, which is why I didn't go to art school, by the way, for that very reason. And I'm glad I didn't. So I use it, but not for the same reason, not to the same effect. I don't fool myself.
It seems as if you use art as a bridge between generations and cultures. Because you work with young people as a coach and mentor, how do you see art helping younger generations find their sense of identity, especially within indigenous or marginalized communities?
Well, because of the fact they can identify what I paint. I love the way, well, I know this sounds terrible, but I don't want to look white. I don't go in the sun anymore. I love the beauty of America. Americans have beautiful features, man. They got these intense eyes and cheekbones. The black people, like the Maasais, these are beautiful people. These high foreheads. My goodness, people don't know this. All they see is all you white people, these whitewashed looking people, and that's their sense of beauty. Well, what about the Hispanics? What about the Mexicans? What about South America? What about Africa? What about the Mongolians, Mongol. I mean, these cultures are incredibly beautiful. We're not exposed to them. So I try to do that. Matter of fact, my book is full of people with different cultures because I happen to personally like them. I prefer them. It's not even an attempt to think. I just naturally like them. I prefer them. In fact, most of my paintings in fact, they're all Indians, first of all. In fact, people have to work. Can you paint white people? So, yeah, okay, fine. I'll paint a white person for you, make you happy. After all, everybody, I've done everything imaginable, every age, you name it. But I do find everyone has in their original design before they whack it out or abuse it, whatever, something beautiful. You just got to catch that.
Can art be a tool for healing collective memory? For example, helping a culture reconnect with traditions that have been disrupted or forgotten.
Definitely, yeah. 'Cause I think every culture needs their identity. And one of the biggest problems, biggest mistakes the white people did when they came into the American Indian or any other culture is they try to wipe it out and force feed their culture, thinking that's the answer. That's the gospel. It's not the gospel. The good news is the gospel, but not their white culture. That was what destroyed it. And it's doing today, it's done also the age. As a matter of fact, J. Hudson Taylor was a missionary to China. Okay, he's a white guy. He had no success for 20 years. They didn't listen to the guy. Okay, what if I shave my head, leave a scalp lock at back, which I had, by the way, and I live like them, I dress like them? What'll happen? Well, all of a sudden, he's like getting followers until all of a sudden, he's the guy that formed China Inland missionaries that changed all of China. Imagine what kind of effect he had once he identified with their culture. As the Apostle Paul says, I must be all things to all men. Once you catch on to that, I think it'll start getting somewhere. Not that you can fake it, no. But if you realize that's a biggie, but even with them, I realize with the Apaches, they had our guts. I don't care what you say, they do, and for good reason. Same in other cultures, and I don't blame them. So how do you cross that? Well, to me, the arts is one thing. If you can show them in the light that shows them as beautiful, man, what a difference. I remember I had a show at my college that couldn't wait to get rid of me. Back when I was there, couldn't wait to give me an honorary doctorate 25 years later. Finally asked me to come back, show my artwork. The head of the English department, who was part Indian, and he said, you have restored dignity to the American Indian. So that's what it does. Basically, I couldn't have camped them any better way than my paintings, because I don't even have to be there. I just show them. And this day and age, you don't even have to show the actual painting. Just see a reproduction of it. So that's why.
Let's talk about your process. When you begin a new painting or piece of writing, where does it start for you? With an image, a thought, or a feeling?
Feeling, a slight image. I write from the inside out, not from the outside in. Now, sometimes that means you're writing from the gut. and you write a lot of stuff. And I would say basically out of all the stuff you've written, you get rid of 9/10 of it eventually. But in the meantime, you go with these different feelings and you explore them until finally it's refined. I see it now, I see the vision. For example, I write under all sorts of different moods. Unfortunately, I'm one of the people who wake up in the middle of the night, like 3 o'clock, with these brilliant ideas, and I can't go back to sleep, so I write. Later on, maybe a day or two later, oh, this is junk. And all of a sudden, no, that's a pretty good idea, and I go with that. So I do it under different circumstances. Like I'm one of these physical fitness freaks. I work out 3-4 hours a day, weights, upper body, lower body, whatever. But at the same time, I'm writing when I'm doing it, or I'm ruthlessly editing. I realize when I'm working out hard, man, I'm ruthless when it comes to editing. Like, this is junk. Get rid of this. As it goes down, I pare it down to the absolute essence. And I keep doing it under different circumstances. Finally, I get, this is it. I'm going to go with this. Now, that may take a long time to do that. It doesn't start out that way. It starts out with this inner force, this drive. Well, I'm the same way when I work out. I mean, all the things I do, it's like I got this burning thing inside. I can't control it. So that's part of it. It takes that initial fire within you to do it. That's why I like Black musicians and Black artists. They've got that fire. And I just love to watch Michael Jordan. That's poetry in motion. Watch Bird. He looks like a duck out there. I'm not saying he doesn't get the ball in the hoop. It's not poetry. I don't want to look at Bird. I want to look like a Michael Jordan, you know. That's poetry, man. It comes out of nowhere. That's art. That's beauty.
Do you have any rituals or habits that help you stay grounded in your art, especially during long creative seasons?
Yeah, I would say just my lifestyle itself. I wake up early. I've got certain routines, but I'm not by the numbers. I'm not sure how you want to get to this, but I pray. I read the Bible. I read all sorts of books to get into this whole thing. But it's the actual force and fire inside me that I've got to channel in the right way. Because even if I were totally atheist and doing nothing, I would still be an artist. That would be my God, for example. So that's there. That's just a given. So it's a question of how do I channel that in the best possible way? But there's certain techniques. That's why I think, to me, is a combination of the soul, brains, and the body. You got to have them all go at the same time. If you don't, it starts to affect each other. The body goes, then it's harder for the mind to function. The mind goes, forget it, forget the soul. So you got to have them all, but in priority, soul, mind, and body. That's why I'm such a total physical fitness freak. My whole diet it's boring. For years and years, I had less than 4% body fat. To me, eating was not a connoisseur, a gustatory, enjoyment, eating taste. It was a mathematical challenge. Like, okay, so many grams of protein, so many grams of not saturated fat, can't have that, yada, yada, yada. The routine, the exercise, all the while I'll be doing the reading, the writing, and so forth. So yeah, in that sense, I was very routine, but I realized that the first thing is the actual inner voice itself, not the structure. The structure is just a means to an end. That's all.
So would you classify yourself as a starving artist, or has your art and, career gave you a certain level of comfortability?
I'm both, because, for example, as a writer, I was a starving artist, but I realized, okay, to write, I was a good teacher, they all love me and so forth, but it got in the way of my creativity as a writer, because I'd pour all my creativity into class to get them going. I was never I wasn't a typical teacher. So I had to sort of break away from that. As far as the art, that made it almost right away. Within 2 years, I was a starving artist. And all of a sudden, my entire show was bought up by one of the richest men in the world. And shortly after that, he flew me up to New York to meet Nixon to paint his portrait. He had a show for me in Paris, one-man show. That was never a problem, other than the first few years. I mean, one time in my life, I had 4 jobs at one time. I was a teacher, I was a security guard, I was the bus driver, and let's see what else was maintenance man. All at the same place. I was sleeping in the security guard job. That was the starving artist, and all of a sudden I got a call from this richest guy and said, I want you to quit your job, I'll match whatever you make. And I said, well, let me finish up the year. I want you to fly up the year, meet Richard Nixon, paint his portraits. My life can change just like that, which it has many times. So never a problem really in terms of the art, except for sometimes. But in terms of the writing, that was always a choice. And I realized to make it there, I got to find a way to write without the interference. And the best job I ever found was working security. And if you've been to Miami, back in the 80s, man, or the 70s, I should say, from 70 to 80, that was a gold mine for security. That was the crime capital of the world. They had more crimes in Miami than anywhere in the world. 1,000 murders a year in the city proper, mainly drug related. So, man, I could, I had no problem. But, I take the riskier post, realizing that as long as no one hassles me other than occasionally, I can write the greater America now, which I did. So that was also sacrifice. And I'm still making it today and will. In fact, right now I've taken the vows of poverty. I live right here in the res. I live in a dinky little trailer, and I love it, by the way. I've had the big house in the hill, been married, and I won't get into that, but I'm free now to just, I love it. They don't have all that stuff. I mean, you don't own it, it owns you. So anyway.
Okay, let's go into this quick fire round. I'm going to ask you a question and you just tell me the first word that comes to your mind. A piece of art that changed your life.
I just say piece of art would be a book, Catcher in the Rye. That really changed my life. You're like, wow, that's a voice that I can do and go further than that. And then Portnoy's Complaint. Wow, that's another voice because Catcher in the Rye made me realize what I can do, but Portnoy's Complaint made me realize how I can do it. And those are the two big influences. And I read all the classics and Neil Leon Effect, but not with those two books. So to simply say art, I'd have to narrow it down for those two works of literature. In terms of art pieces, there's too many. The one that really changed there's too many out there. I like some of Wyatt's, but that wouldn't really nail it down. I like Birchfield, no one even knows who he is, but some of his stuff, November Evening was probably the one that really reached me. It's not a lot of realistic stuff. Some music, but no, I wouldn't say those two books. On the Bible, but then that's another category altogether. That's just a lifestyle in terms of artistic.
The most inspiring place you've ever painted or written?
Well, the most inspiring place I lived was New York, Pennsylvania. But in terms of actually painting, I didn't really paint it. In terms of writing, it's more, I live in the mind. James Joyce did his best work when he left Ireland. All he did is write about Ireland after he left it, Dublin, for example. A lot of artists do that. So I write stuff that occurred in the past. It's like you put it on the memory bank and years later you write about it when you're far enough away from it. As far as place, I like New York City. In fact, if I had to live in any place in the world, it'd be New York City, Paris, or San Francisco, but I'm afraid of earthquakes, so that takes care of San Francisco. I don't speak French, so forget that. So, I like New York, but I don't like it in the wintertime. So I'm happy where I am at the moment. Let's see what else.
One artist, living or dead, you wish you could have a conversation with.
One artist I'd like to talk to, J.D. Salinger. I'd love to talk to Philip Roth. Probably the two. That would be the two I'd like to talk to. Of course, Salinger, forget him. He was a hermit. He went up to New Hampshire and you never get hold of him. Philip Roth was more attainable, but he died quite a few years ago. Those are the two.
The color that best represents your current season of life.
Red turns me on because there's something about red that's revolutionary. I guess red. Whether I do, it's 110%, baby. Whether love, like in the Army, well, you were in the Marine, but they had a PT test. The perfect score of 500. And I was so into that I was the 36th person at Fort Benning, which is the infantry capital of the world, to get a perfect score. Even Jim Brown, by the way, to get a 490. I'm not saying he was far better athlete than I was. Obviously, but I was that kind of fanatic when I did something. Swatch white flies, you can what I'm doing. So 100%. Red, I guess, represented best. I'm not a placid person. Blue and green, they're all too placid.
Okay. The one word that describes what art means to you.
Oh, it's life itself. In fact, if I didn't believe in God who created me, about him, deserve him, that would be my God, plain and simple. In fact, I fight that temptation every day. Lord, help me not to make that my God and just use it for my God. That's the difference. And definitely art, without a doubt. Some form, preferably writing, but if it weren't writing, it would be painting, drawing, caricatures. I'm not a great musician, so forget that.
You spent decades creating, teaching, and giving back. When you think about legacy, what do you hope people remember about your work and your contribution to the communities that you touched?
It was the greatest novel of the 21st century. Can I say? It's not an answer. I don't care if they put somebody else's name on it. I don't care about the name. I haven't thought about what did I change my. I was stuck with a name like Mueller. Mueller was always a bad guy in German movies. I picked up on me being not that much German, but a lot of other things. Was embarrassed by the fact that I stuck with that name, So I don't care about the name. I care about the work.
Okay. We're going to enter that part of the show called Flip Mode. You get to ask me 3 questions now.
Okay. What art affects you the most? We'll start with a very general. What form of art moves you the most?
100%, 100% music. I express myself, I learn. Everything to me is music. Ooh. I would have to say to me, the most influential artist that I could relate to was Prince because he was a total artist. I mean, you're talking about he was a musician, he could sing, he could dance. He stylized his own creative look. He designed everything concerning his image.
All right, third question. What do you think in that art form or what you could do would change the world the way you'd like to in the best, most effective way? Now, really, what you're doing now is very effective, and it's an art form itself, but in terms of the genre we're talking about or the ones we stereotypically think of as art, what would you like to do and how would you do it? Would you be like a Prince or some variation?
I know. How can I say this? I would more so want to do something that would allow children to delve into and express themselves musically at an earlier age. I just feel that children are far more intuitive and creative at that age. And if you can allow them an outlet, which they don't normally get, I think it would make a big difference in their life. Correct.
That's the worst part. The one that killed the arts, the expression is being force-fed something to become like them in order to make it.
In fact, I think that's one of the biggest problems in our society today. Covering any of the arts, I think children, unless they grow up in a house where their parents are artists of some type, most children get exposed to art far too late in life.
See, I was brought up in an art colony. I was just assumed, so no more problem. Never had to struggle. Not that I would have cared anyway. That was the beauty of being loving to fight, because fine, bring it on, because I love to fight. Hey, excuse, I never got asked it that way. Later on in life, like, okay, how can I use it in an effective way? I mean, you can't keep fighting. What's the best way? To me, words. What can destroy a person more than ridicule?
When you're in New York, look up Vince McMahon and join the WWE.
No. I know my limits now. I'm too old for that. No, I threw my back out. First move I'd make, I threw my back out. So no, I want to live a few more years.
For someone listening today who may feel disconnected from their roots and unsure of their creative path, what would you tell them about finding meaning through art?
Well, what turns you on? Forget what people tell you should turn you on. What turns you on? Be totally honest about it. I always was. That was a different. That's why, someone asked me, what would you rather do? Or what would you change again? Well, maybe I should have been an English major, but if I were, then I'd be forced into the way they think. I'd be talking like them, being like them, the worst in the world. No, follow your own inclination and find out your own voice. Have the guts to do that. That's the real trick. You can do that. Then you have an idea of what works for you and what's going to help you become a better person, a better artist, so forth, more effective.
Jim, this conversation has been a reminder that art isn't just something we create. It's something that defines, preserves, and unites us. Thank you for sharing your insight, your story, and your passion for the human spirit. Tell me where we can access some of your writing or some of your artwork online and how people can contact you, how my listeners can personally get in contact with you.
Well, Grace McCormick, who is my promoter, Light Finder, has handled all that, and Steph in London, so they set all this stuff up, which is totally beyond me. But if you Google James Frederick Mueller, Art and Literature, that's a start. That'll lead you off into the book and so forth. The book would be Confessions of St. Augustine, which you can look up, just Google that. Make sure you get my name, not the original guy that wrote the other one. That'll lead you into all sorts of rabbit holes. The new edition is just coming out. There's also going to be an ebook any day. Well, there's going to be a few books down the road that are coming out. They're already written, by the way, which I won't get into. They're political parodies and so forth, if you can imagine. Hell, on steroids, the Thinking Man's SNL. That's sort of the direction they're going, which will be coming out too. But they're all accessible through all that stuff you guys do on the computer, which I don't do. That's why I pay people like, well, I can't do it.
That's why I pay my team too. It takes too much time to do all this stuff affiliated with this show. So
Instagram, yeah, I'm on Instagram, all those things. Facebook, you name it, I'm on them.
yeah, okay. Wonderful. To our listeners, thank you for joining us on the All About Us podcast today. Jim, it was great having you here. It was just totally refreshing, a breath of new air. And to my listeners, remember, art doesn't just reflect who you are, it helps us become who we were meant to be. Have a great day.